You've talked about this lack of congregation and this feeling that the Hindu has that he or she is alone as a Hindu. But you see what's happening in India, and you will find that if you play the regional identity card, if you play the language card, you play the jati card, then you will get thousands and millions of people behind you.
Correct.
So you call it Dravidianism, you call it caste reservations,
Correct.
you call it whatever.
Correct.
So Hindus find it easier to gather in sub-identities. Like, you will fight for your language issue, you'll fight for your regional issue, you'll fight for your caste issue. But to come together as a Hindu, why is it so difficult for us?
Correct. So this is the hypocrisy of both the left and the right, and I'll explain why. Because the hypocrisy of the left is well known, the hypocrisy of the right is rarely spoken of. And I don't belong to the right. I belong to the Indic side, I'm very clear about it, because I don't associate it with any imported ideal as much as possible. Here's the problem. So tribalism is a reality of human psychology. It could be ideological, it could be ethnic, it could be linguistic, it could be cultural or religious. Now we are comfortable with tribalism at the sub-identity level. But the moment we speak of Hinduism, we start mouthing this nonsense. It's all inclusive. You don't compromise on the boundaries of your sub-identity, but you compromise on the boundaries of the larger identity. What stupidity is this? Who is teaching you this? When Bhishma speaks with Yudhishthira at the fag end of his life and he's basically giving him, let's say, discourses on Rajniti and whatnot, one of the things I think he says is that Vedas are supreme. Now, going by that, if I say this, that Vedas are supreme, there are obviously certain folds within the Hindu denomination or Hindu sects who don't believe as Veda as the primary pramana. They may believe in the other four precepts, which is dharma, artha, kama, moksha, but they may not believe that the Veda is the primary source or proof of this fact. That could be the distinction between these Astika and Nastik schools of thought. Nevertheless, if you go by the scripture, the definition of Bharat and the definition of what is Mlecha is dependent entirely on subscription to the Veda and eating habits, which is we will not consume beef. These are certain non-negotiables. You can't say this today. The left disagreeing with it is no surprise. But you can't say this even with people from the non-left. Because apparently, to include the modern secular liberal Hindu, who anyway doesn't want to be a part of you, you must somehow compromise on your non-negotiables. Whereas the other side is saying, whoever you may be, you join this fold, you will live by this, period. That's it. If not, you don't get to speak on our subjects. You don't get to hold forth on what is modern Hinduism without actually even subscribing to the basics of non-negotiables. That need for very clear red lines is not need for fundamentalism, is the need for a clearly defined identity. And when that need is constantly diluted, like a company which wants to expand its shareholder base or its customer base at the expense of its core messaging, will come back to haunt you at some point. In such a volatile world, where identity is ruling the roost from the left to the right and every other place, you're telling me that your best possible strategy is dilution of your identity? Well, you're doing what the other fellow already wants. So what battle are you in? I don't understand. It's like getting into boxing match saying, "Tum kyun maar rahe? Main apne aap ko maar leta hu." You might as well get out of the boxing ring altogether, throw in the towel. So, that larger identity. Two, how do you build this larger identity? You're asking people that at the altar of Hindutva and Hindu unity, to give up jati identities fully. It hasn't worked for 1,000 years. Because jati will continue even after you convert in some places. You have Brahmin churches in Goa, you have Shudra churches in Goa. So if jati is not something you're able to do away with, not just here, but in the larger subcontinent, it appears to be endemic to the reality, the social realities of this part of the world. Why do you think you can succeed where all your ancestors have failed? What do you have which they had never had? How are you better off in understanding the Hindu society when all of them have realized you can't do away with this? That some kind of grouping is going to work somewhere or the other? When you know you can't work against something, you should find a way to make it your strength. which means reinforcement of the fact that the presence of Jati and Varna is proof of presence of Hindu Dharma everywhere. It should not be the other way around. The left wants Jati without Dharma. Members of the right want Dharma without Jati. And both of them don't realize, so they are clear at the very least. You finish this, that's the end of Dharma. These guys think Dharma will still survive without this. From Lalita Sahasranamam to Vishnu Sahasranamam to Purusha Suktam to everything. The integrality of Varnashrama Dharma to Sanatana Dharma is very clear. By the time you end Vishnu Sahasranamam, it will basically speak of knowledge for the Brahmin, strength and victory for the Kshatriya, then Samruddhi for the Vaishya, and peace for the Shudra. You will find this in Lalita Sahasranamam also. In fact, it goes on to say that she is the one who has created the Chaturvarnashram. Okay? Now you please sit with me and tell me all of this is false. Why? Because you're saying, if I don't disagree with this, how will I then defeat Udayanidhi Stalin in a debate? So to defeat Udayanidhi Stalin in a debate, I will remove and redact verses from Lalita Sahasranamam and Vishnu Sahasranamam. Jai Hindutva. Huh? This can't be the way how it works. Have the courage of your conviction to defend these concepts. What you need to be able to do is, if it results in exclusion, if it results in discrimination, if it results in a situation where it excludes people from access to certain spaces, that is what you need to fight. So to fight caste-based discrimination is one thing, and to say I will annihilate caste is a completely different thing altogether. Fine, then there is also bound to be discrimination on the basis of gender. Let's finish gender. Oh wait, left is already doing it. Because they are saying patriarchy is responsible for all evils. So finish patriarchy, so finish man, so what is left? Even woman is not there. If one identity is gone, where will be the other identity? Okay, let's finish religious discrimination. Oh wait, communism already exists, no? Because it says no God. So if you start morphing Hindutva in the mold of the left and the communists and let's say in terms of their ideology, so you're producing leftist Hindutva. So the version of Hindutva is communist Hindutva. Identity will always exist. You must find a way to reconcile it with your realities without giving up the core. It's easy to say, let's remove the concept of caste from temples. Will you say this to all those temples where the Purohit is not the Brahmin? I dare you to say this. You will not be able to say this because it's politically incorrect to say it. It will have consequences on the streets. So clearly, all the prejudices with respect to Hindu Dharma that the left has perpetuated, including anti-Brahmanism, have been successfully accepted by the Hindus, let's say the Hindutva guardians as well, which according to me is the charam seema of the success of the left. When you speak in their language and you have just called it Hindutva, social justice and reform, what is it in, how different is it in spirit? Only the difference is in the labeling of the product. If that's the case, I might as well go with the original. Why should I go with the counterfeit? As an IPR lawyer, I'd say go for the original then.
So what is the way out of it? Is the way out of it to go back to your sampradaya, to go back to your temples, use temples as an institution that acted as a institution that basically held the society together? Is that the way? When you talk about finding your faith, see, nowadays we have made our faith increasingly an individual thing. Okay, you sit in your house and
religion
you do meditation.
Is personal, apparently.
Yeah, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual, kind of dichotomy. So how do we make it once again inclusive, once again communal in a, not in the sense the left uses it, but as a community activity? How do we again make it more congregational, so to speak?
There are three possible solutions, and I'm not saying this as someone who was a Trikala Jnani. I don't know. I'm just saying this. One, whether you like it or not, the definition of Sampradaya has something to do with Jati. Because some deities have evolved as a consequence of the vocations practiced by the members of the Jati. If you say, let's finish Sampradayas altogether, you're also saying those deities must also go. You may not understand this. Because when you say this, who is going to take the tradition forward? If it happens to be a deity that is close to the weaving community or the cobbler community, who knows what is to be done? Then your only solution is, let some of these deities perish at the altar of Hindu unity. The better thing to do, according to me, is reinforce the Sanskritic layer over the regional layer or the linguistic layer. And the best way to do this is language. And that is what the Englishman brilliantly understood. He has made a so-called common identity, where English has become the common identity thanks to the lingua franca that you use, right? Now, therefore, follow the triple, let's say, language system, regional 100%. You choose either English or something else as, let's say, your medium of engagement with the rest of the world. But Indians must at least believe in engaging with each other through layman Sanskrit or layperson Sanskrit, to use Justin Trudeau's language. So I think it's important that the Sanskritic identity cannot be re-established without the re-establishment of Sanskrit needs to be clearly understood. On that, if you're busy saying Sanskrit is not Hindu, yoga is not Hindu, yoga nidra is not Hindu, Hindu is not Hindu, arey, what is the debate here then? That is one. Second, to those geniuses who say, I am spiritual but not religious, you are neither. Simply because you're too lazy to be disciplined, and that is passed off as evolved spirituality, which according to me is humbug of the first order. Ritual has multiple aspects to it. Discipline is one element. But when you enter the metaphysics of ritual, when you realize that from the smell to the sound to the color, all of them have a very clear impact on your consciousness and your ability to direct your consciousness in one particular direction, you will realize how deep this goes. Before you start any Devi Puja, the first elaborate procedure that they do is the color of the Rangoli, which is elaborately laid out. There is a paddhati for it. The colors used have a paddhati for it. The design of the yantra has a specific paddhati for it. The manner in which you lay the bricks for the home, everything has a very specific reason for it. What is the meaning of the east? What is the meaning of the west? What is the meaning of Adhvaryu? Where will the Brahma sit? All of this have meanings for it. So if you say that de-ritualized Hinduism is the only thing I am capable of subscribing to, I will not come in the way. Please do it. You can go to that level, just don't drag the rest of us to that level. Because your insistence is going to be that from temples to Hindu population must now subscribe to my lowered levels of Hindu practice. That cannot be the case. Because then you are saying, I am modern, I am secular, I am equally Hindu. So my definition of Hinduism should now be commonly applicable. That is the problem with the Sabarimala example. Where you're saying ritual mein kya rakha hai, manyataon mein kya rakha hai, sampradaya mein kya rakha hai, anything goes. There can't be a dress code, there can't be red lines even within a temple. So need for an understanding of ritual, because if you see the history of the world, every religion that has given up on ritual will lose its identity in less than 400 or 500 years. The textbook example is the consequence of the Protestant Reformation on the survival of Christianity in Europe. Because Catholic Christianity did two things. Because it was introduced during the Roman period, it chose, and there was a conflict between the non-Christian pagans and heathens and the new revolutionaries called the Christians at that point. They combined both. So saints were created after, or let's say based on, the figures that were previously held dear by the pre-Christian citizens of Rome. So Catholic Christianity combines elements of Christianity and combines elements of local faith systems. Which is why, even in India, Catholic Christians don't have a problem wearing bindi and the bangle. It is the Protestant who won't wear it. It is the Protestant who won't wear the Hindu symbols, the Mangal Sutra or whatever. The Catholics will still do it, because that has been the strategy of Catholic Christianity all along. The Judeo-Abrahamization of Catholic Christianity is a slightly later phenomenon. The original Catholic Christianity, to a significant extent, is a product of the parliaments created, the religious parliaments created in Europe, where they say, how do we now define the history of Christianity? How do we define what is, who is Jesus and why is he divine, so on and so forth. I think it's called the Parliament of Nicaea. So when you see that, and from there you see Protestant Reformation, we see Protestant Reformation as marking the beginning of Enlightenment, as marking the beginning of an advancement of Europe. Protestant Reformation starts around the 15th or let's say maybe 16th century. And today you are in 2023. It's taken only 500 years for Europe to stop believing that it's a Christian continent. So several of the Hindu panths which said, we don't want the Karmakanda of the Veda, that is only for the Brahmin, we don't want it, are seeing Christianization of their states, and I'm talking of Punjab. You create a panth without the need for a ritual, you have opened yourself to somebody else. You'll have Yesu Kirtan going on there. It's a leftist conspiracy.
While I understand this, it is also happening in the coastal states of the south.
Yeah.
Amongst populations which held on to their dharma for thousands of years in a very ritualistic way.
Right.
So how is it becoming this easy to divorce them from their ritualized faith?
So the two labs of missionary experimentation in this country were Bengal and the South, because these were almost the first two presidencies. I think Battle of Buxar and Plassey. The East India Company gets the Diwani in 1765 after the Battle of 1764, which is the right to collect taxation on behalf of Shah Alam II, who was the Mughal emperor, in Odisha, Bengal and Bihar. So that's the first lab. Then Madras was set up in 1639. So their very first port, or let's say their trading post, was set up in Masulipatnam, I think in 1615. And then I think it's Surat, then Madras, and then Bengal. So when they come, along with that, you have the missionaries coming with them. Yeah. So the series that I'm writing in the Indian Express is actually tracing this history, showing how they spent almost 100 years, or maybe 70 years, trying to separate Shaiva Siddhanta from Hindu Dharma. Saying Shaiva Siddhanta has got nothing to do with Hindu Dharma. That literature is built over decades. And gradually they start looking at the obstacle called Jati coming in the way of conversion. So then they realize that the only way for me to make Jati my strength is by creating a larger fissure, and that is the racial fissure of the Aryan and the Dravidian. So if I say that these Jatis are fundamentally Dravidian, then the entire Jati falls as a block. Okay? So you see there's this bank, Tamil Nadu Mercantile Bank, that is run by the Nadars. And Nadars as a community, you will find a huge demographic split, having moved away to Christianity. Okay?
I think.
Correct. And this is in the Tirunelveli side, and I think it's in that part, Sivakasi, Tirunelveli, that side. And it's otherwise, Nadars, Mudaliyars, Chettiyars, and all these communities are both landed, mercantile, and heavily Shaivite communities. And their belief in Hindu Dharma, including when they played the role of soldiers at one point, was huge. They were converted as a block, thanks to the racial fissure. When you say that if your faith is strong, you can't be converted, I keep trying to poison you for 5 days against one person. Let me see if your mind hasn't even slightly changed towards that person when you interact with that person. If not anything else, I've already sowed a seed of doubt in your head each time you talk to that person. Imagine this happens at an institutional level for decades, with money also being offered. Plus, when Hindu Dharma's restrictions and obligations are presented as discrimination, then what do you do? If I clearly say, nobody can enter the Garbhagriha except the Purohit, even if you're a Brahmin, but you say only the half-truth, see, only Brahmins are allowed inside the Garbhagriha, then what do you do? If I then make the statement, boss, Everybody had access to Hindu knowledge systems. The knowledge of the Vedas alone were limited to Brahmins for only one reason, because there are elevated standards of Anushtanas that are supposed to be practiced throughout the day. Apart from the Sandhya Vandan, the fire has to be kept burning at all points of time. So you have to be an Agnihotri for you to continue saying this. There are limitations on procreation. There are limitations on food. You are expected to cook on your own whenever you travel. All these restrictions exist. So unless those restrictions are followed, you cannot subscribe to this or you cannot have access to this. This is an elevated eligibility criteria for an advanced knowledge system. You're telling me for a postdoctoral degree, I'll go with 610 mathematics. Okay? Not possible, not permissible. It's as much a spiritual tradition as much as it is a knowledge tradition. And since it is a spiritual tradition based on knowledge, you cannot compromise on this under any circumstances. Assuming that the outsider comes and says, look at this discrimination. They don't want to talk about the fact that from Vishwakarma communities to all other communities, they had a working knowledge of the Vedas. Because those they had to have, because those who could not access the Vedas directly, they were given the fifth Veda, which is Mahabharata. Which is your Itihasas are meant to convey the very same message of Dharma that Veda conveys, except that it does that in a more relatable form, in a much more, let's say, story-based form. Stories have been our way of communicating the saransh and the essence of the Vedas to those communities which are otherwise kept away from it because of restrictions based on Shastra. So you have that. Then, if you really understand the Vedic tradition, then you will know that out of the 4 Vedas, you have the 6 Vedangas, and you also have what is known as the Upaveda, which means at least 14 to 18 knowledge traditions that have come out of it. Dhanurvidya is directly connected to Yajurveda. Similarly, Shilpa Shastra and Vastu Shastra is connected to one particular Veda, which means you think of this as the core basic science. From that comes out one particular applied science. So each applied science is related to one particular Veda. Now, if Upaveda can be practiced by others who are not practicing Brahmins in the Vedic sense, what is the discrimination that you're exactly speaking of? The applied part of the Veda which comes out of each Veda is available for access, right? But you don't want to talk about it because gradually even we have bought the very same lie of the missionary. The tragedy of independent Bharat is that it has taken every lie perpetuated to it by the colonizer. That hasn't been addressed. And it is not just about history. It is about actual discussions that we carry on today with respect to Jati and any other subject which is sensitive to us. So I think that's where the answer is. So I certainly appreciate efforts of all current day historians. But the one thing that we certainly need is people who are actually trained in the Vedas to go out as ambassadors and speak of the truth of the Vedas and explain what is the distortion it has been subjected to over the last 150 to 200 years. Very few people are qualified for it.
Very, very true.